President Trump has confirmed his administration will impose tariffs on America's three biggest trading partners. Starting today, imports from Mexico and Canada will be hit with levies of 25%, while Chinese goods will face a tax of 10%. Though some products, it's not stupid, is he, like oil, could be spared. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump hinted that Europe, or rather the European Union, could be next. Here's what he had to say.
The European Union charges us 20% plus a VAT tax, called a VAT tax, very similar, and it costs us an absolute fortune. We are treated so badly, and we have a tremendous deficit with the European Union, so we'll be doing something very substantial.
Fascinating, isn't it? Joining me now is Pablo Ohana, a political advisor based in New York. Pablo, thank you very much for joining us. Now, a lot of our viewers are today going, this is Trump putting America first. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, I don't think anyone could argue with that. But as is often the case with Trump, almost always the case with Trump, the real reasons beneath that are often a little more concerning. I mean, no one can argue with the aim of, reducing illegal immigration or tackling the drug crisis, these kinds of issues. But, the real reason behind these tariffs, we know Trump has had a problem with Mexico for a long time. He's accused them of being rapists and murderers. And, Mexico is a transit point for the drugs that he talks about. But, the majority of fentanyl entering the US doesn't actually originate from Mexico. So the concern that I have about targeting Mexico with tariffs is that you're not actually addressing the root cause of the problem. And, the threats against the EU, for example, so Trump wants to argue that the EU imposes, barriers on importing US products and things like that. That may well be the case, but one of the root causes of that is that the EU has one of the highest, if not the highest, standards for health and safety in the world. Take their food, for example. The US permits over 10,000 chemicals and additives in everyday food products. Of those same 10,000, the EU approves under 300. So I totally get he's the president of the United States. America comes first. That is not surprising. But, a lot of these issues, particularly with the EU, they're restricting many of these imports simply because they're just banned across the continent.
The stock markets have fallen for an announcement, but the value of the dollar has jumped. So far, the financial reaction seems quite positive.
Yeah, I mean, time will tell, and there are issues with all of these trade tariffs, and time will tell whether this works out. But trade wars very rarely result in anything useful for anyone. So you may appear strong briefly, and he can say that he's delivered on some policies, but ill thought out policies often result to weak problems later on. So time will tell on that, but I'm not sure that that's going to hold out for very long.
Can we gauge how it's going down in America at the moment with the American public? Are they thinking this is a good thing, or are they worried that, as everyone is saying, inflation will be affected and it will be the consumer that ends up paying the costs?
There's a mix, of course. If you're a Trump supporter, great. He's delivered on policy. Of course, this is what they wanted. He promised to do this during the campaign. No one can argue that he isn't delivering on his promises. But I think there is definitely concern that prices will increase. And there is a reality that we live in a global world. This idea of kind of every country fending for themselves is not really the case. It isn't the case in the UK. It isn't the case in the US. Obviously, economies in each country are completely different. But ultimately, we live in a global world where people trade and import and export and all these kinds of things, that we don't live in this kind of insular world, no matter how big or strong the economy of a country is. So there is some concern, if you're sort of slightly leaning towards the left, maybe you're a Democrat supporter, you're very concerned about imports being taxed and, the unfairness of certain borders and targeting certain countries. I mean, Canada, for example, isn't really the root cause of any of these problems. I think Trump just wants to start a fight with Canada in the same way that he would just wants to start a fight with the EU. So there is some legitimate concern for sure, and there is always a case to be made that you've got to tackle the drug crisis. Totally legit, right? But America has had its issue with drugs for a very long time. A lot of these issues started in the country.
To explain what you mean by that, I mean, Trump blames Canada and Mexico for the flow of drugs and migrants over the US border. Excuse me, that is why he is targeting both of those countries.
Right, but Trump can tariff Mexico, Canada, China, the EU, whatever, but he has to recognize that a lot of these issues, the drug and opioid epidemic has deep roots in the US, and a leading contributor to the drug crisis in the US has been the extraordinary overprescription and aggressive marketing of opioids, primarily OxyContin, which a lot, that's kind of the main one people have heard of. That's an American pharmaceutical company hasn't really had any repercussions. You know, that the real border crisis with, you know, isn't really with Canada and the EU. It's between America and its own pharmaceutical industry. The healthcare system is broken. It's built for and by the wealthy. So you can slap tariffs on whatever you want, but if Trump really wants to fix this problem, he can start by fixing the American healthcare issue.
OK, I will leave it on that one. Pablo, thank you very much. That's Pablo Ohana, a political advisor based in New York. Thank you very much.